It's about time I got back to what I'm supposed to be doing on this channel, and that is reading and reviewing horror and other dark things. And so today I'm here with a wrap up of my recent reads, including 2 books by 2 major horror rock stars. Yes, we have Grady Hendrix and Stephen Graham Jones, who both have new releases in the first quarter of the year. I have read them both. I'm going to let you know which one is worth your time, which one you should pick up based off of your taste, and of course also have some other books as well. If that all sounds good, let's get started. First, let's start with Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. And this, of course, is a story that follows a group of girls that are sent off to go live in this home where girls who have gone astray or specifically gotten pregnant are sent away by their families. We follow one girl who, of course, has fallen pregnant at the beginning of the story that is being sent off there. She begins to make friends with these other girls and really bond over the fact that their families have thrown them out and see them as these disgraces. And of course, as the title suggests, there is a supernatural, potential horror, witchy angle to this book, and the story goes on from there. Now, for context, a little bit of background with my own reading experience with Grady Hendrix. I have read and reviewed all of his major horror works at this point, and I will say it again, as I've said before, that I think he's an incredibly smart writer when it comes to writing modern horror, where he is very self-aware of the roots of the genre. He's literally written a nonfiction book on the topic, which is over here, and as well really brings it into the modern light. And so I love what he does. He takes these topics and makes them new again, even if he's playing with concepts and tropes and themes we have seen before. And that's once again what you see here. On top of that, I think he writes some of the best characters, and particularly some of the best female character. There often is this misconception online that men can't write women, and I would argue that Grady Hendrix writes women better than a lot of women that I know, and he just does a great job of really fleshing them out as real people, really leaning into the parts of the feminine experience that I think a lot of us connect with. Again, those female friendships that have truth to them and aren't simply rivalries, but really seeing the beauty of the friendships as well, the complexity, the coming of age, trying to fit in, trying to understand yourself or have your family understand you, or dealing with the fact that your family doesn't understand you at all. I think all of these themes are incredibly relatable and are all explored within this book here. On top of that, again, you do have witchy angles to this book, and it definitely dives into those horror aspects. It's one that I love everything that he does. However, for my personal taste, there's always something about the way he writes where he is so self-aware of everything that it almost holds me back from getting fully immersed in the story. I recognize it's probably an unpopular opinion. I don't see many people giving his books less than 5 stars. For me, they're solidly always 4, simply because while I appreciate absolutely everything he is doing, I love what he does with his books, they still aren't the 5-star experience that I look for my personal favorites. But if you have loved his previous books, I think that this is one of his best, or at least right there up there with a lot of the ones that I've really enjoyed. I think it's smart. Again, definitely leaning towards a female audience, having that concept that feels very reminiscent of a boarding school where you had these girls away from home, that bonding over female friendship, again, the coming of age, loss of innocence, and really the found family that we end up coming across as our own families let us down. So if you're looking for any of that, if those are themes that you love, I think you'll be really satisfied with this one. Keep in mind that it is very slow paced, it is much more character focused, and it does take a while for the horror elements to get going. So very much depends on what you're looking for a book, but if you're looking for a slow build, slow suspense, that is going to give you that female friendship experience at the forefront of the story, if you're looking for that, you won't be disappointed. Next up, we have The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This one is a piece of historical horror that is set in the early 1900s, and we follow this priest who is recounting his experience where there is this vampire that is seeking out and hunting the indigenous people of this time. And so I first love that the author is taking a bit of a departure from his modern day slashers. He has done quite a few of those recently, and personally, while I really appreciate what he does, I have grown quite tired of that subgenre as a whole. And so while I think he does it better than most, I would love him to do something else, which is for the most part what he's doing here. Technically, you could argue that there is certainly a slasher element to a vampire that is hunting down individuals, but with the historical setting, and again, focused particularly on a vampire killer, I think it brings something new, something different. It's one that I very much appreciate what the author is doing in terms of the conversations. Again, bringing just a good horror story into the past, but then also using it as a good opportunity to reflect on a lot of the historical events, the cultural implications of a lot of the past, especially here in North America. And I love how that is woven into the story while also providing a dark, gruesome narrative. As I often see with this author's work, there is potential harm to animals woven throughout the story, so just keep that in mind. He is not someone who shies away from those familiar tropes, but within the story, again, if you can handle it, it definitely is that dark, gripping narrative. I always say that his writing is very distinct, and it works better here than it has in other places for my personal preference when it comes to a narrative voice, and of course bringing in that indigenous perspective, which I always respect, always love. I'm not a huge fan of historical fiction as a whole. I again appreciate it a little bit more than I personally enjoy it, so your mileage with this one may vary. I found it to be a little bit dry, and again, if you're looking for more that juicy, thrillery action ride, it's much more subtle, it's much more character focused, but if you've read this author before, that probably shouldn't surprise you because I think that is what he does best. So I do recommend this one to the right audience. If you're already a fan of Stephen Graham Jones, I think this is a pretty easy one for you to pick up and love. If you have never read him before, I do think it's a good place to start as long as you like historical fiction. I do think you need to like something written in the past in order to get the most enjoyment out of this one. So do recommend it if you're that person. Next up, let's talk about But Not Too Bold, which is a little horror novella that follows an individual who is taking over for the previous keeper of the keys. They have died under mysterious circumstances. It seems to involve this carnivorous spider, and so now their protege is taking over and trying to piece together what happened to the person they were working against. This one is just weird, and either you're gonna love it because you love weird horror, or it won't entirely work for you, which is what happened with myself. And I will acknowledge that I'm just not a huge fan of weird horror. I think I am. I keep picking it up thinking I'm going to love it, and then it's weird and it's strange and it's kooky and off kilter, and I don't necessarily love those things because for me they don't evoke a feeling of fear and suspense and horror the way I'm looking for when I pick up a horror story. Instead, I find myself trying to dissect them and tear them apart or find logic where perhaps there is none. So if you love these weird absurdist stories more than I do, again, I think it's going to be up your alley. Just not for me, but I still appreciate it. I thought the writing was quite nice. It was quite an interesting narrative, especially with the different characters and figuring it all out as it went along. So I liked it, but just too weird for me. Next, let's talk about The Swarm by Andy Marino. This is a horror story that follows private investigators who are investigating this girl who was killed under mysterious circumstances. Right at the beginning of the story, there's another attack where a young girl is attacked by insects, and of course, more to the story continues on. Essentially, it's a post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic novel specifically that focuses on this end-of-the-world type scenario involving swarms of insects. So very biblical in terms of the thematic elements brought in. And again, it's more the early stages, so more the apocalypse is happening rather than what happens afterwards. So it's very action-packed, it's fast-moving. I personally didn't find the characters to be the most compelling, which held me back from really loving it, but ultimately it's one that I think other people may enjoy more. Again, if they're looking for something like that, I often just am looking again for good character work and need that more than just an action-packed story, because I often say that my feelings of horror that I get from a book don't come from action scenes, but rather caring deeply for the characters and then worrying about what's going to happen to them. And so this one read to me more like an action movie, kind of a end of the world, what's going to happen. You see the characters running around trying to survive, and it's just not what I look for in horror. So not another favorite of mine. I promise we're getting to a really good one before the end of the video, but this is not a personal pick for me. Next is Our Winter Monster by Dennis Mahoney, and this is a story that follows two individuals who have a past or something that happened that has really broken apart their relationship. However, they are trying to escape this blizzard that is coming, so they are traveling together in this winter scene. Of course, there's more going on, and essentially, without giving away too much, this is a horror thriller, so there is an entity, this winter monster that they have to face together. This is one that I picked up largely because of the fact that I'm always looking for more winter-themed horror and thriller books, so this one certainly fit the bill in that regard. And if you are looking to read a book that is set in a blizzard while you're in a blizzard or something along those lines, this one does tick that box. However, for me, I'm always looking for something new, and this one was really tropey. So it does follow the falling out between two individuals being forced together and having to survive, and how that incident changes and grows them and makes them have to open up about their past and all of that. And it's a book or a topic or theme or plot that I've read over and over again. So for me, it wasn't that compelling. Again, I would somewhat recommend it if you're looking for something wintry, but because it is such a fast-paced read, I felt it didn't slow down enough to give me those winter atmospheric feels that I was looking for. Again, a lot of people, like even myself, if you hear about a winter thriller, you have to check it out for yourself, so maybe you're more intrigued by this one. Just know that it's really predictable, really straightforward, and you're gonna get exactly what you would expect from that premise. I also read Listen to Your Sister by Nina Weil. This is a horror thriller that follows a family where something has happened to the parents, and now the older sister is the guardian for her younger brother. At the beginning of the story, he's gotten in trouble at school. She's trying to deal with that. However, as the story progresses, he does something horrible, and then the family has to go on the run. That's the basic premise that is on the back of the book, and all you need to know from there transpires into an action-packed thrillery plot that does devolve into a horror story. For me, this one was really over the top. The sibling characters and the relationships felt like caricatures and did not work very well for me. And on top of that, the horror elements, again, were just more exaggerated than I would have liked, and I found I lost my suspension of disbelief, which is the greatest sin, perhaps, other than boredom, when it comes to reading horror fiction. So this one did not work for me. Really disappointed. I saw really great early buzz, great early reviews, but for my personal preferences, this one was a dud. Don't recommend it. I thought it was a narrative mess, and I'm so disappointed about that. And if you aren't keeping track, I've been so far lukewarm on all the releases I've been reading this year, and so whenever that happens, I go to the backlist, meaning books published before 2025, and so I picked up Pan's Labyrinth, which of course is the same story that is told in the movie. Both the book is written by the same author who wrote the screenplay for the movie. I happen to already love the movie. I've watched it multiple times, and so it was great to dive into the book that has very much the same plot and is not really an adaptation, but rather another form of the same story, since I believe they were published roughly around the same time as they were co-written together with the movie being published. And so this, of course, follows a young girl who is surviving during the war. Her mother is being married off to this man in the higher up of the military. He already got her pregnant with a child, and the mother is suffering horribly from the symptoms of this pregnancy. This young girl, of course, is just trying to survive in this dismal, dark scenario. And of course, because of that, she dives into her imagination, or appears to, and then it becomes a bit of a portal fantasy. However, what I love in comparison to the typical portal fantasies that I read is that this one is dark, and it doesn't have the magical escape into another world that you have with something like Narnia, and instead the world that they escape into is perhaps just as dark and twisted, and very much is a reflection of the real world. And so you have this horrible real world scenario, and then you also have the horrors of this fantastical world as well, and it all is just dark and twisted and messed up. Often I tend to love either the adaptation or the original story. I don't tend to love both mediums, but that is not the case here. I adore the movie, and I think that the book really captures the same tone. Again, I think it helps that it's not quite a true adaptation, but really pulling the material in two different directions and telling them in two different ways. So highly recommend. Even if you've seen the movie like me, I think it is great to re-experience it in the book form. It didn't necessarily add more in terms of information or reveals, but rather just added a whole layer of, again, the atmosphere, the feeling, the tone, and brought me back into the world again without watching the movie. So highly recommend this one. It is a dark horror fairy tale that anyone who loves horror, anyone who loves fairy tale retellings should read. It is its own unique story, but very much gives those otherworldly feels that I love so much. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And if you haven't noticed, again, I'm starting off this year a little bit weak when it comes to 2025 new releases, so I have to turn that around. I'm going to be seeking out the best, the brightest, and my personal favorites based off my reading preferences. So if you have any recommendations, definitely drop them down below. I have a few ideas of which books I'm going to try out next, and I will of course come back when I have another video for you all. If you're new to my channel, hope you stick around and subscribe. If you haven't yet, please give me a thumbs up. If you think I deserve it, drop a comment, even just an emoji, hit that little notification bell, and I will hopefully be talking to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.